Confessions 14. My memory also contains my feelings, not in the same way as they are present to the mind when it experiences them, but in a quite different way that is in keeping with the special powers of the memory. For even when I am unhappy, I can remember times when I was cheerful, and when I am cheerful, I can remember past unhappiness. I can recall past fears and yet not feel afraid, and when I remember that I once wanted something, I can do so without wishing to have it now. Sometimes memory induces the opposite feeling, for I can be glad to remember sorrow that is over and done with, and sorry to remember happiness that has come to an end. There would be nothing remarkable in this if memory recalled only our bodily sensations, for the mind is one thing and the body another, and it would not be strange if I were glad to remember some bygone bodily pain. But the mind and the memory are one and the same. We even call the memory the mind, for when we tell another person to remember something, we say, "See that you bear this in mind." And when we forget something, we say, "It was not in my mind," or "It slipped out of my mind." This being so, how can it be that when I am glad to remember sorrow that is past, that is, when there is joy in my mind and sadness in my memory, how can it be that my mind is happy because of the joy that is in it, and yet my memory is not sad by reason of the sadness that is in it? No one could pretend that the memory does not belong to the mind. We might say that the memory is a sort of stomach for the mind, and that joy or sadness are like sweet or bitter food. When this food is committed to the memory, it is as though it had passed into the stomach where it can remain, but also loses its taste. Of course, it is absurd to suppose that the memory is like the stomach, but there is some similarity nonetheless. But when I say that the mind can experience 4 kinds of emotion, desire, joy, fear, and sorrow, I call them to mind from my memory, and if I enlarge upon this by analyzing and defining each of these emotions according to the different forms which each can take, I draw upon my memory and produce from it whatever I'm going to say. Yet while I remember these feelings by drawing them from my memory, they do not produce any emotional effect in me. Before I recalled them and thought about them, they must have been present in my memory, because it was from there that I was able to summon them by the act of remembering. Perhaps these emotions are brought forward from the memory by the act of remembering in the same way as cattle bring up food from the stomach when they chew the cud. But if this is so, when a man discusses them, that is when he recalls them to mind, why does he not experience the pleasure of joy or the pain of sorrow in his mind, just as the animal tastes the food in its mouth? Perhaps the simile is unjustified because the 2 processes are not alike in all points. For if we had to experience sorrow or fear every time that we mentioned these emotions, no one would be willing to speak of them. Yet we could not speak of them at all unless we could find in our memory not only the sounds of their names, which we retain as images imprinted on the memory by the senses of the body, but also the ideas of the emotions themselves. But we did not admit these ideas through any of the body's gateways to the mind. They were either committed to the memory by the mind itself as a result of its own experience of emotion, or else the memory retained them even though they were not entrusted to it by the mind.